The wind came down like it had something to prove, dragging needles of ice straight off the Sangre de Cristo peaks and slamming them through the adobe walls of Taos. It howled through narrow alleys and church bell towers, rattled wooden doors, and clawed at the hem of Silas Romero's coat as he stepped out of Ortega's store, squinting into the late afternoon frost. He cursed low, pulled his hat down, and tucked a small parcel coffee salt and rifle shells under his arm. But he didn't head straight for his horse. Not yet. Across the plaza, beneath the crumbling archway of the old mission church, she was still there. Same spot, same stiff posture, same filthy calico dress faded to the color of old bones. No coat, no scarf. Just thin arms pulled tight across her chest, like she could hold the cold off by will alone. It had been 3 days. 3 days of pretending he hadn't seen her. 3 days of telling himself it wasn't his business, and now he couldn't breathe right when he looked at her. Behind him, Ortega shuffled to the door and leaned out. "You gonna stand there until the sun freezes solid, or you planning to ride home sometime today?" Silas didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the girl, his jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. "You know she's been there since Sunday." Ortega went on, voice quieter now. "Ain't said a word to anybody. Folks think maybe she's dumb. Or broken. Maybe both," Silas muttered. "Or maybe she's waiting for someone who ain't coming." Ortega paused. "That a wait you're willing to live with, Silas?" The wind screamed through the square, and somewhere nearby a shutter banged against a frame like a warning. Silas stared at her, thin as a whisper. Fingers curled stiff and white where they gripped her knees. Her shoes were nothing but leather ghosts flapping open at the toes. Her hair stuck to her face in frozen strands, and her eyes. Lord, her eyes were hollower than anything he'd seen since burying his wife and son. He looked away first, because he couldn't take the way she didn't. His boots crunched through frost as he stepped off the boardwalk. The cold bit through his coat settled deep in his ribs like grief. When he reached the mission steps, he stopped short. "Girl," he said, "you got people coming." She didn't answer, didn't blink. Silas exhaled hard. "You got a name?" Still nothing. But she shifted, barely, a slow twitch of her fingers. "You speak at all." She opened her mouth, and for a moment he thought words might come, but instead only a breath, white and empty, drifted out. He crouched down, careful, like easing up to a wounded colt. "I can't leave you here, you know," that he said softer now. "It's dropping to 12 tonight. You'll be dead by morning." Still, she said nothing, but her chin dipped just slightly. It was enough. "All right," Silas murmured. "Come on then." He peeled off his coat and wrapped it around her, surprised by how little weight she had. Bones. That's what she was. Bones and blue fingers. When he lifted her into the saddle, she didn't fight. Just grabbed the horn like it was the last solid thing in the world and held on. Silas swung up behind her, settled her against his chest, and tucked the edges of the coat around them both. She flinched, stiffened, then stilled as the warmth reached her. The wind hit hard as they turned onto the trail out of town snow, kicking up and swirling ghosts along the ground. "I ain't got much," he said into her ear. "Small house, bit of food, but you'll be warm. That's a promise." She didn't reply, but her head dipped into the space between his collar and jaw, and her breath came lighter. The ride home took longer than it should have. Snow had started falling, and Copper's hooves punched through crusted drifts as they wound through pinyon-covered hills. The sky pressed low and gray. Coyotes howled from somewhere distant, and Silas kept one hand tight on the reins, the other on the girl's back, feeling the tremble in her bones. By the time the ranch came into view, just a squat adobe house with smoke curling from its chimney, His jaw and fingers were numb. He slid off copper and reached up for her. She came down like a feather, barely able to stand. He kept his hand on her back as he led her inside. The fire in the hearth hadn't died down, thank God. Warmth hit them in waves, melting the silence that clung like snow. Silas helped her sit in the rocker nearest the flames, then knelt to untie her ruined shoes. Her feet were mottled blue, and her socks stuck to her skin. He worked carefully, pulling off each layer with slow hands. "You hungry?" he asked, not looking at her. A small nod? That was something. He went to the kitchen, poured milk into a pan, and set it on the stove. His hands shook slightly as he cut bread and cheese. Not from cold. Not exactly. He hadn't had anyone else in this house in 3 years. Not since the fever took Ruth and little Nico within the same week. The silence had been a kind of peace, or a punishment. Now it felt like something breaking open. He brought her the plate, set it beside the rocker, and stepped back. She looked at it, then at him, then back at the food. Her hands moved careful, like she didn't quite believe it was real. When she finally took a bite, her body shuddered like the act itself was foreign. But she ate, bite after bite, like someone who hadn't had a full meal in days. When she finished, she leaned back, eyes on the fire. Her lips moved. He stepped closer. "What's that?" They said to wait, she whispered. Voice hoarse, cracked. Said someone had come. Silas stared at her, his throat tight. Who said that? No answer, just those same empty eyes. He moved to the window, looked out into the white. Snow was falling harder now, covering the trail, the fence lines, the graves behind the house. Everything disappearing. He turned back, saw her curled into his coat, cheeks flushed with warmth, eyes beginning to close. He thought of Ruth, of Nico, of promises he hadn't kept. "You'll stay here tonight," he said quietly. "Tomorrow, we'll see what's what." But deep down, he already knew. This wasn't a one-night thing. And whatever storm was coming, it wasn't just outside. The silence in her wasn't just quiet, it was a fortress. The morning light crawled through the frost-coated window panes, streaking pale gold across the floorboards of Silas Romero's kitchen. A gentle hiss came from the stove where the kettle sat ready, and the smell of coffee mingled with the dusty scent of old wool and cedar smoke. Silas sat at the table, elbows braced, staring into his chipped mug as if the dark swirl inside might reveal something he couldn't see. The girl Ember, that's what he'd decided to call her, until she gave him something else, was still asleep, in the rocker, arms curled tight around her middle like she was keeping herself from falling apart. She hadn't stirred once during the night. Not when the fire popped. Not when he threw on another log. Not even when he laid the extra quilt over her and whispered, "You're safe here." She just slept clenched like a fist. Now Silas rose, pouring the coffee slow. His knees popped a reminder of last spring's fall from the roof. He paused by the rocker and set the mug on the stool beside her, careful not to startle her. But she opened her eyes anyway, sharp and sudden like a bird waking under threat. "It's warm," he said, nodding to the mug. Sweetened a little. She stared at him, not moving. "Look, I ain't gonna make you talk, but you gotta eat, and I figured you might take something warm." Still nothing. Silas let out a sigh and turned toward the stove. He'd seen silence before, in war, in grief, in himself. But hers felt different, like it was built brick by brick, and behind it was something worse than anything he could guess at. "I got chores to tend to," he said over his shoulder. "Barn's just out back. You need anything, holler. Or don't. Up to you." He stepped into the cold and pulled the door shut behind him. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he crossed to the barn where the horses greeted him with quiet snorts and shifting hooves. The rhythm of the morning was familiar feed water checked the tack. But the weight in his chest wasn't. It was the same weight he'd carried the day he buried his son. Heavy, dull, always pressing just enough to keep you from breathing right. When he returned an hour later, the rocker was empty. He dropped the pail by the door and froze. Ember, no answer. He stepped inside, eyes scanning the room. Fire still going. Mug untouched. Blanket tossed aside. Then he saw the front door ajar. His stomach twisted. He grabbed his coat and threw it on, heart-pounding now. The snow outside was fresh, powdery, but he could see small prints heading toward the tree line. Damn it. He followed them at a run, boots slipping on the ice-slick trail. The tracks wove between scrub and pine, and panic gnawed at him as he imagined her collapsed in the snow, blue-lipped and breathless. But a few minutes in, he saw her just ahead, kneeling near the creek bed. He slowed, breath-catching, and approached carefully. She was hunched over something, a small mound of snow, her fingers tracing it gently. Her shoulders were shaking. He crouched beside her. "You all right?" She didn't move. His eyes followed hers, and he saw it. A bird, frozen, stiff and crumpled at the edge of the creek. Looked like it had tried to drink and hadn't made it back up the bank. Ember reached out, touched the bird's wing, then pulled back, like it burned her. "Came out here just to find this?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer, but her jaw trembled. "You ever see a hawk fall from the sky?" he asked after a moment. "Wings still spread, just drops like a stone. Happens in storms sometimes. Wind cuts under 'em wrong." She looked up at him, lashes crusted with frost. Sometimes, he continued, "You don't fall because you're weak. You fall 'cause you're flying through something too damn mean to survive." Her lips parted just slightly. Then she looked back down at the bird. He knelt beside her and reached into his coat, pulled out a small square of cloth, gently wrapped the creature and placed it in her lap. "You can bury it near the tree line, that big cedar up the slope. I'll help you dig." She held the bundle close, her hands moving slow but careful. Back at the house, he fetched the shovel. Together they walked in silence up the hill. The snow had thinned beneath the branches, and the ground was tough, but not frozen solid. Silas broke the first layer, while Ember knelt beside him, the bird still in her arms. When the hole was ready, she laid it down without a word. Silas covered it gently. Then they stood in silence, two figures against a pale world, shadows stretching over snow. "She was waiting too," Ember whispered. Silas turned his head. The bird Ember nodded, but no one came. He didn't answer right away. Just looked at her, really looked. "You don't know that," he said. "Sometimes help comes slow, but it comes." She blinked fast and looked away. They walked back without speaking. Inside, he helped her out of her wet socks, handed her new wool ones from a drawer. She didn't argue, just slipped them on, movements, small and shy. That night, she ate more. Still silent, still guarded, but present. Silas noticed she kept glancing toward the window, as if waiting for someone to appear out of the snow. He lit the lanterns, locked the door, and stoked the fire again. Later, when she curled up in the rocker, he caught her whispering, "A name." "Lena," he said gently. "Is that your name?" She didn't respond, but the way her body tightened said enough. "Lena's a strong name." She pulled the blanket higher. He let her be. That night, after she'd fallen asleep, Silas stepped out onto the porch and looked up at the stars punching holes through the velvet dark. He couldn't shake the look in her eyes, the kind that said hope wasn't just hard, it was dangerous. Inside, Lena stirred in her sleep, her brow furrowed lips, moving in dreams. And far off down the valley, two men rode under cover of dusk, one carrying a paper with a forged name, and the other with a map folded in his coat pocket drawn by someone who said, "There's a little girl out there, and she's worth something." The wind shifted again, but this time it didn't just carry snow, it carried trouble. The man said he was kin, but something in Lena's eyes said she didn't believe it. Snowfall had turned the yard soft and white again by dawn, the crust broken only by the trail of boot prints between the house and the barn. Silas Romero stood on the porch with a rifle slung loose across his arm, watching two strangers ride down from the ridge. The sun hadn't yet touched the valley floor, but even in half light, something about the lead rider set his teeth on edge. Too clean, too confident, too well-fed for a man claiming he'd been searching for a lost girl through the Wyoming winter. Behind him, Lena peeked through the curtain. Her breath caught. Silas didn't look back, just murmured, "You recognize him," her fingers curled into the fabric. She gave a hesitant nod, then shook her head quickly, uncertain. The riders pulled up before the porch. The lead man, tall, square-jawed with boots polished to a shine and a silver belt buckle that caught the light, tipped his hat. "Mornin'. You must be Silas Romero." "I am." The man slid off his horse with the kind of grace that came from law offices, not saddle time. "Name's Landry, Clay Landry. I'm here on behalf of the Garrett family. Heard tell you got someone inside who don't belong to you." Silas let the words hang in the air. Someone Landry smiled like a man used to getting past locked doors with charm alone. "A little girl. Name's Lena Garrett. Her folks have been worried sick." Silas didn't answer. He studied the second rider, a wiry, silent man with a flat look in his eye and a pistol low on his hip. Muscle, not family. "Where's this worryin' family been the last 4 days?" Silas asked flatly. Landry stepped forward onto the bottom stair. They didn't know where she was. Word finally reached us from down in Timber Glen that a rancher had taken in a stray. Description matched. "I rode straight here." "Fast horse," Silas muttered. Landry chuckled. "Well, I do hate to keep a father in agony." Behind the curtain, Lena drew back. Her hands trembled. Silas motioned toward the porch chair. "Why don't you warm up a minute? I'll get the girl." Landry took the seat like it was a throne. His companion remained mounted, scanning the trees. Inside, Lena stood rigid. Her face had gone pale, eyes hollow. "That man, he say anything to you before?" She shook her head. "You sure?" She opened her mouth, hesitated, then whispered, "He came to the church that night." Silas's jaw tensed. "Before I found you," she nodded. "Watched. Didn't come close." Silas crouched to her eye level. "Lena, I need to know, do you trust him?" "No," she said immediately, then softer. "He smells like tobacco and bad things." A grim line drew across Silas's face. He opened the cupboard, pulled out the old revolver he hadn't touched since the fire last spring. Checked the cylinder. Full. He stood and nodded. "Stay in the bedroom. Don't come out unless I say." She vanished like smoke. Back outside, Silas returned to the porch, arms folded. Landry rose. "Well, she's inside," Silas said evenly. "Says she don't know you. Says you were outside the church that night watchin'." Landry's smile slipped. "I think I'd like to see some proof you're who you say you are." Landry pulled a folded paper from his coat. Signed by Lena's father. "Grantin' me custody if anything went wrong." Silas took it, unfolded it slow. The paper was clean. Too clean. Ink still sharp, signature shaky but not smeared. "You travel with legal papers. Sometimes I need them." Silas folded it back. "This paper ain't proof of blood." And I sure as hell won't hand over a scared little girl to a man she doesn't trust without something more. Landry's jaw twitched. You questioning my authority, Romero. I'm questioning your character. Silence stretched. Then Landry stepped closer. Now listen. I got legal right. I got money behind me. You're a nobody on a piece of land barely held together with fence wire. You don't want to get in the way of men like me. Silas held his ground. Then you best ride back to town, Clay, and fetch the sheriff if you believe the law's on your side. Landry's companion let his horse shift forward, but Silas's hand drifted toward his revolver just enough. Landry held up a hand. Easy now. No call for this to turn bloody? I'll be back with the law like you said. But don't get too comfortable, old man. That girl don't belong to you. He turned and mounted, flicked the reins hard. They disappeared down the ridge trail in silence. Inside, Lena emerged. They're gone for now. She didn't speak again, just walked over to the fire and sat cross-legged, staring into the flames, like she could burn the memory of that man from her mind. That evening, Silas rode into town. He left Lena in the care of Etta May, a widowed herbalist, who lived 3 miles downriver and had once delivered his son. Kellerman's general store was quiet when he arrived. Inside, the bell above the door jingled, and Kellerman, half-deaf and mostly curious, peered up from his ledger. Silas. Ain't seen you since harvest. Trouble depends what you call trouble. Silas laid the custody paper on the counter. You seen this signature before? Says it's from Lena's father. Kellerman squinted, pulled out his spectacles, and whistled low. Looks like it came from Judge Forrester's desk, but I'd bet a sack of oats it's forged. Grant Garrett's been in the mines outside Durango over a year. And even if he did send word, he'd never trust Clay Landry. That man don't do anything for free. You know him better than I care to. He's a land scout, buys up abandoned claims and flips them to the railroad or the banks. Heard a rumor lately some big deposit was found east of Timber Glen, and someone's paying him to sniff around. Silas's spine straightened. And if a little girl happened to be the last living heir to that land, Kellerman's eyes narrowed. Then she's worth more than gold dust in a spring thaw. Silas pocketed the paper. Appreciate it. You stir in a hornet's nest, Silas. Already been stung. Outside, the wind had picked up, and clouds rolled over the moon like a curtain being drawn. He rode hard back to Etta May's, only to find the lights out and the front door open. Heart jackhammering, he rushed inside. Lena. A moment later, she appeared from the kitchen holding Etta May's cat like a shield. Etta stepped out from behind her shotgun in hand. Boy, you best send a wire before you go scaring an old woman like that. Silas let out the breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. I need to keep her with me, he said, looking at Lena. They'll be back. Etta nodded. And when they do, you'll need more than kind words. And a rusty Colt. Silas looked at Lena, who clutched the cat tighter but didn't step away. I won't let them take her. And in the shadows beyond the barn, where the wind stirred loose pine needles and frost began to bite again, 2 men waited, watching the house, counting their time, and waiting for the sheriff to ride in their favor. Tell me what home means to you, Lena Etta May asked gently. 'Cause sometimes it ain't where you were born, but where you were finally seen. Lena sat on the porch steps, her knees pulled up under her chin, wrapped in an old quilt Etta May had brought from town. A faint wind rustled the naked cottonwoods beyond the fence line. Snow still clung to the edges of the barn roof, dripping slowly in the noonday sun. The sky was high and blue, but the cold lingered in the shadows. Inside, Silas was boiling coffee strong enough to melt rust, keeping one eye on the trail that led back to Timber Glen. Etta May settled next to Lena, setting down 2 tin cups of peppermint tea. One for her, one for the girl. Lena stared at the rising steam, not reaching for it. Her fingers were too busy twisting the edge of the quilt. Folks think kids don't remember things, Etta said, sipping slowly. But that ain't true. Sometimes y'all remember too much. Lena's eyes flicked toward her, cautious. I remember being left, she whispered. My mama wrapped me in her best shawl. It smelled like lemon and dirt. Etta May said nothing, just nodded and waited. She said she'd come back. Lena's voice thinned. She said, don't cry, but I did anyway, for hours, until it was dark. Etta placed a warm, dry hand on the girl's knee. Sometimes love ain't enough to keep someone in place. Sometimes people are running from ghosts so loud they can't hear their own children cry. Lena blinked her lip, trembling. She could have taken me. She might have believed she was saving you by leaving you. That don't make it right. But it does make it human. Lena drew in a shaky breath, then asked, Is this a real home? This place, Etta looked out toward the land. Depends what you mean by real. There's dirt under the nails and truth in the walls. That man in there, he's lost more than most. But he's got eyes that see past what's broken. The girl nodded slowly. Silas stepped onto the porch just then, his boots heavy on the planks. You hungry? Lena looked to Etta May first. The woman gave a subtle nod. A little, Lena said. Well, Silas grunted, good. I made a stew. Might be more bark than beef, but it'll warm your belly. The corner of her mouth twitched, nearly a smile. Etta May watched the exchange and smiled into her tea. The girl was still half-shadowed, still wary, but the ice was beginning to thaw. Inside, they ate in silence. Silas carved small pieces of meat and placed them in Lena's bowl without a word. She didn't thank him, but she didn't flinch either. Afterward, while Etta May washed up, Lena followed Silas outside to the barn. Can I see the horses? He nodded and led her into the dim interior. The two geldings and old mare stirred in their stalls. Lena paused before the smallest one, a roan with a white blaze. What's his name? Name's Cricket. He don't look like a cricket. Silas chuckled softly. That's the joke. Lena stretched a hand toward the roan. The horse sniffed her palm, then nudged her gently. She smiled, really smiled this time. Can I brush him? Silas handed her the brush from the wall. Be gentle. I will. For a while, the barn was filled with soft strokes and murmured words. Silas leaned on the stall rail, watching her quiet and steady. He thought of his own boy born in this very barn during a thunderstorm 12 years ago, lost to fever before his 10th birthday. Sometimes the land gave. Sometimes it took. Back at the house, Etta May stood by the window drying her hands. Her eyes traced the silhouette of man and girl through the warped glass. The sheriff arrived just before dusk, his horse kicking up frozen mud as he dismounted. Romero Sheriff Dalton called, tipping his hat. Silas met him at the gate. Evening, Sheriff. You got visitors in town causing quite the stir. Landry's Raisin Cane says you're holding a child against her will. Is that so? Dalton sighed, pulling his gloves tighter. I know you, Silas, and I know that man's full of hot air. But truth is, he's got papers one's Judge Forrester already ruled on in another county. Silas narrowed his eyes. So we giving away children now to whoever's got enough ink and coin? Dalton rubbed his jaw. What I'm saying is we need time to sort out what's true. Judge is riding in next week for circuit court. Let's keep the girl safe until then. She ain't going nowhere. Dalton looked him in the eye. Then keep her close. And watch your back. Landry's the type to light a match and call it justice. Later, around the fire, Silas explained what the sheriff had said. Lena listened with wide eyes. What if they come when you're not here? They won't. But what if they do? Silas hesitated, then reached for the silver chain around his neck. He pulled off the ring at the end, a smooth wedding band worn from time and sweat. This was my wife's. She wore it when she felt brave. I don't wear it no more. He handed it to her. You keep this on you. If I ain't there, you remember you're part of something now. You've got people. Lena held it in her palm, then slipped it on her thumb. It spun loose, but she clenched her fist around it. Outside, the wind picked up. Etta Mae stepped onto the porch, her eyes narrowed. There's someone at the bottom of the trail. Silas joined her. 2 lanterns bobbed along the ridge. Too early for cowhands, he muttered. Too quiet for neighbors, Etta added. Lena stepped beside them, clutching the ring. Is it him? She asked. Silas put a hand on her shoulder. Don't know yet. But in his gut he did, and the fire behind his ribs told him the time for waiting was near over. She's mine by blood, the man snarled, breath fogging in the cold. You think some washed-up cowboy and a God-fearing widow get to rewrite what the law already wrote? The knock came at daybreak, sharp and angry. Silas was already standing by the stove rifle across his lap, boots planted wide. He didn't look at Etta Mae, who stood beside Lena near the hearth, arms protectively folded around the girl's shoulders. Lena gripped the ring around her neck so tight it left a dent in her palm. Silas moved to the door, unlatched it, and pulled it open just enough to show he wasn't hiding. Caleb Landry stood there, his dark coat dusted with frost, 2 men flanking him, mercenaries in plain clothes with hard eyes and heavy hands. Mornin', Silas said without warmth. You got something of mine, Romero Landry said, and I'm here to collect. She ain't something, Silas replied evenly. She's someone, and she don't belong to anyone who lets her freeze on church steps. Landry's face twitched just enough to show the crack behind his confidence. I got papers, he said, pulling a folded document from his inside coat pocket. Signed and sealed. Custodial rights granted by a district judge in New Mexico territory. That girl's my niece. Her mama, my sister, passed last year. Ain't nobody else in her bloodline but me. That's so. Silas raised a brow, unmoved. Where was all this kinship when she was starving and shaken alone in the snow? One of the hired men shifted, resting a hand on the revolver at his hip. Etta Mae stepped up behind Silas' voice, sharp as broken glass. You so much as blink the wrong way toward that child, I'll plant you where the frost don't melt. Landry sneered. You think you can hold her here when the law says otherwise? I think, Silas said slowly, that, until Judge Forrester rides in, that paper's just ink on dead trees. Sheriff Dalton knows where she is, and unless you got a warrant, you best turn that horse around. Landry stepped forward, jaw set. She's coming with me, one way or another. The air went still. Even the chickens in the coop seemed to hush. Silas leveled his eyes with the man. You try to take her, and I swear to God, Caleb, it'll be the last thing you ever do. Landry didn't move, but his eyes flicked to Lena peeking out behind Etta Mae's skirt. Come on, girl, he said, voice syrupy and foul. Ain't no need for all this fuss. Your mama, God rest her, wanted you with me. Lena didn't move. She just stared. Landry softened his tone. I got a room for you. A real one. No chickens outside the window. A stove that burns all night. You don't belong here. These folks ain't your blood. Lena's voice came out low but clear. Blood ain't never warmed me. Landry blinked. Silas let the silence stretch, then closed the door slowly, deliberately, and slid the bolt. They heard the horses turn, the crunch of boots in snow. No shots fired, but no peace made either. Etta Mae exhaled shakily. He'll be back, I know, Silas said. Lena sat down on the hearthstone, pulling the ring from around her neck and staring at it like it held a spell. He said my mama died, she murmured. Etta moved toward her, kneeling. Did you know she might be gone? Lena nodded. I felt it, like she faded, not left. I'm sorry, baby, Etta whispered, brushing the girl's hair back. I don't remember her smile, Lena admitted. Only her leaving. Silas walked to the window, eyes scanning the ridge. That man didn't come for love. He came for ownership. Etta nodded. And he'll come again, more prepared. We need to get ahead of it. That night, Silas rode into Timber Glen, slipping through the back door of the sheriff's office. Dalton looked up from his desk, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. Let me guess. Landry showed up. With friends, Silas said grimly. Judge won't be here for 4 more days. She doesn't have 4 days. Dalton reached for a ledger. I'll wire ahead, try to get the judge to move faster. But Landry's got roots. He's got money, Silas. And he's got a case if that document's legit. Silas leaned in. What if I told you he's not after custody? That girl's part of an inheritance claim her mama filed before she died, silver rights in Pinos Altos. He gets Lena, he gets the land. Dalton stared at him. I ain't got proof, Silas added, but it fits. Why else would a man show up now after years of silence, I'll dig, Dalton said. See what Landry's tied to out there. In the meantime, keep her close. When Silas returned before dawn, Lena was awake, sitting on the porch, boots too big and coat wrapped to her chin. You came back? She said, not quite a question. Promised I would. They sat in silence a while, frost sparkling on the grass. Do you think my mama ever loved me? Lena asked suddenly. Silas didn't answer right away. I think sometimes love ain't loud. Sometimes it's broken, but it's still real. She looked up at him. What if I'm broken too? You're not, he said softly. You're bent in places, sure. But things that bend don't break easy. Her eyes welled, but she didn't cry. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded scrap of paper, a drawing she'd done in charcoal. It was crude, but it was the cabin and the barn and 2 tall figures with a small girl between them. I don't want to leave. Silas swallowed. Then we fight. That afternoon, Etta May rode into the next town over, stopping at a small, weather-worn house where a stout woman with sharp eyes opened the door. Maribel, Etta asked. I need your help. Maribel Prescott, midwife, record-keeper, and the best digger of truth west of Pecos, raised a brow. What kind of help? Legal kind. The kind that uncovers what a man's trying to bury. Maribel stepped back and let her in. Start talking. And as the sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows across Romero's land, a storm began to build, not of weather, but of reckoning. Because the next time Caleb Landry came back, it wouldn't just be Silas waiting, it'd be the truth. And the truth had teeth. When someone tries to bury the truth, it always has a way of clawing its way out. Sometimes wearing boots. The wind bit harder that morning, slicing across the Romero property with a kind of warning howl. Silas stepped out onto the porch, mug of coffee in one hand, and watched the horizon for movement. Nothing yet, but he could feel it like the pressure before a storm breaks. Inside, Lena sat cross-legged on the wooden floor with an old rag doll Etta May had dug out of storage. She didn't speak much, but her eyes followed everything. She was watching how they moved, how they protected her, how they didn't push. She didn't smile, but the tension in her shoulders had eased. That morning, she'd even asked to feed the chickens. She's changing, Etta said, wrapping a shawl tighter as she joined Silas on the porch, bit by bit. She's healing, he replied. But it's got to be protected. Etta's jaw clenched. You talked to Dalton Wired, the judge. He's on his way, but it'll take time. And Maribel's still digging. Says there's a will filed somewhere in Silver City that mentions the girl by name. You believe it? I believe Caleb Landry wouldn't lift a finger if there wasn't silver at the end of it. Etta exhaled. Man like that don't deserve to raise a rabbit, let alone a child. Behind them, the sound of small boots thumped across the porch. Lena appeared at the door holding out a folded envelope. This came while you were talking to the sheriff, she said softly. Silas took it and opened the seal. Inside was a note in Maribel's sharp script. Check Eliza's ledger, Silver City Courthouse, 1879 April filing. Probate under M. Landry estate. Girl listed as beneficiary, but Caleb wasn't. Silas folded the note slowly. She found it, Etta asked. He nodded. And now Caleb's got a motive. Legal and rotten. They didn't get long to sit on it. That evening, Maribel herself showed up on horseback cloak, flapping like raven's wings. Her cheeks were red from the ride, her eyes blazing. He's already moved to contest the will, she said, without dismounting. Filed a claim to override based on guardianship. But he ain't her guardian, Etta said. Doesn't matter to the court if no one objects, and the girl ain't had no one on her side till now. Silas frowned. We object. Then you'd better be ready to prove you have standing? Maribel snapped urgency in her voice. Because he's riding in tomorrow morning with a deputy marshal from Las Cruces. Wants the girl handed over under judicial authority. No hearing Etta's eyes narrowed. No time. They're pushing it through. Quietly. Lena had stepped outside, clutching her coat. They're going to take me, no, Silas said firmly. They're going to try, Etta knelt beside her. Honey, you remember what I said about roots? How sometimes they grow in places they weren't planted. Lena nodded slowly. You've got roots here now. That means something. Maribel dismounted, pulling a rolled parchment from her saddlebag. I need y'all to sign affidavits. And we need the preacher. For what marriage record of Lena's mother? Turns out she married a man before she passed quiet-like. Caleb wasn't listed as next of kin. That may make him irrelevant. Silas shook his head. You're good. I'm thorough. That night they sat around the fire while Etta read aloud from Psalms, her voice steady, warm. Lena rested her head against Silas's arm without a word, her fingers toying with the hem of his sleeve. Do you think God sees me? She asked. Silas looked down at her. I think he never took his eyes off you. She swallowed hard. Even when I was alone on the steps, especially then. There was a long silence broken only by the crackle of wood. Outside, the snow began again falling soft and quiet. By dawn, the path to the cabin was a cold, white sheet. Silas saddled his horse and rode toward the church on the ridge where Reverend Josiah kept records dating back to the war. The preacher, a wiry man with kind eyes, met him at the door. She was here, Josiah confirmed. Came in looking like death was on her heels. Said she needed a witness and a prayer. Married to a fellow named James Cartwright. Kind man. Didn't last long, typhoid took him. She list Lena as their child. She did. Josiah moved to a drawer, pulled a record book, and opened to a familiar scrawl. Here. Silas stared at the line, the ink faded but clear. Lena Cartwright, daughter of Eliza Landry and James Cartwright. That'll hold up in court, Silas asked. It's church record. Stronger than a rumor, weaker than a lawyer. But I'll testify. As he rode back, snow lifting behind his horse like smoke, Silas thought of Lena, of how she didn't flinch anymore when he raised his voice to call for supper, how she had stopped sleeping with her boots on. Back at the ranch, he dismounted to find Etta and Maribel sitting on the porch, steam rising from mugs of coffee. Ready? Etta asked. Silas nodded. Let them come. They came at high noon, riding 5 deep, Caleb the marshal, and 3 men Silas didn't recognize. Guns holstered, but tension strung tight. Caleb didn't wait to dismount. "You had your time to make peace. Hand her over." The marshal stepped forward, reaching into his coat. "Court order certified by the Las Cruces Circuit." Silas opened the folded church record, countered by this marriage certificate and birth record, verified by the Reverend himself. The marshal blinked. "I wasn't told of this. You were told what Caleb wanted you to hear." Maribel held up a notarized affidavit. "And I've got confirmation from Silver City that this child is the sole heir to the Cartwright land, filed under Eliza's name, not Caleb's." Etta stepped down from the porch, hand tight on Lena's shoulder. "Now, unless you want to explain to the judge why you took a child from her legal guardians, I suggest you reconsider." The wind picked up again. Caleb's face turned a deep red. "You'll regret this, Romero." "No," Silas said, eyes like iron. "You will." Caleb turned on his heel, spitting into the snow. "Ain't over. You can't hide behind that paper forever." Silas watched them ride off without another word. Lena came to stand beside him. "They'll come again." He nodded. "Probably." She reached into her pocket and handed him a folded paper, her drawing, but updated. The barn now had smoke rising from the chimney, and she'd drawn a small dog beside the girl. Silas smiled. "Thinking of adding to the family, I was thinking maybe the girl needs a dog. Someone who doesn't leave." He looked down at her, then out over the horizon. "We'll see what we can do." Behind them, the porch door creaked open. Maribel stepped out, mouth set in a tight line. "There's more to this," she said. "Caleb's just the start. That land, someone's pushing him. Hard." Silas narrowed his eyes. "Then we find out who." And just like that, the battle shifted from legal to something deeper. Something bigger than one man's greed. Because now they weren't just fighting for Lena's safety. They were fighting for her legacy. "You want to control the land, you'd better learn who it belongs to. And it ain't for sale, not by blood threat or price." The wind whistled through the mesquite trees as Maribel laid the map across the wooden table, weighted at each corner with smooth river stones. The sunlight from the kitchen window stretched long across the paper, cutting through hand-drawn borders, old miner trails, and creased property lines that hadn't been touched in 30 years. Lena sat on a bench beside Etta, her eyes curious but quiet, a pencil in hand, absently sketching the outline of a horse. Silas stood behind Maribel, arms folded, jaw set. "Show me again." She tapped her finger on a small square marked Cartwright Estate, surveyed 1878. This was her inheritance, Eliza's. She was born on this land. The mine sits beneath it. "You think Caleb knew?" "I think someone told him after the girl's mother passed. I found communication logs between him and a land broker out of Santa Fe. Broker's name is Levi Harmon." "Harmon," Etta muttered. "I've heard that name. Deals in dirt and doesn't care who's buried in it." Maribel nodded. "He's got his hand in half a dozen land disputes across New Mexico. His play's always the same: find a vulnerable heir, twist the law, and claim mineral rights under caretaker management. Then sell to the highest bidder." Silas stared at the map like it was a war strategy. "So we're not just dealing with Caleb anymore." "No," she said. "We're dealing with a system built to chew folks up." Lena looked up, her voice soft. "What do they want with dirt?" Maribel crouched beside her. "Not the dirt, honey. What's under it? Silver, maybe copper, money." "But it was my mama's." "That's right. And now it's yours." Lena said nothing, but her hand gripped the pencil tighter. Silas stepped outside to clear his thoughts. The sky above the high desert spread endless and blue clouds, thin and sharp as knife blades. His boots crunched against frost-bitten grass as he walked to the fence line, scanning the horizon. In the distance, a plume of dust was rising. A single rider. He turned to the porch. "We've got company." The rider slowed as he approached, tall man, dark coat, clean-shaven face, too polished for ranch country. When he dismounted, he nodded politely, but his eyes held no warmth. "Silas Romero," he asked. Silas didn't answer, just studied him. The man extended a card. "Levi Harmon. I believe you've been expecting me." Maribel stepped down from the porch with narrowed eyes. "You've got brass showing up here in person. I find face-to-face is cleaner than telegrams. More civilized." Silas didn't take the card. "You lost your civilization when you sent a fraud to take a child. I'm here to correct that mistake." Caleb acted prematurely. "He forged guardianship," Maribel said. "You think that's going to disappear?" Harmon smiled thinly. "The law's fluid in territories like ours. I offer a simple exchange. Your cooperation for a substantial compensation." "We're not selling," Silas said. "You haven't even heard the price." "I don't need to." "You should," Harmon said, voice colder now. "Because the next offer won't come in words, it'll come in writs. Your little homestead could be tied up in litigation so long that child's hair turns gray." Etta stepped forward, apron dusted in flour, a rolling pin still in hand. "You threatening a child now?" Harmon turned to her, still polite. "I'm offering a resolution. Think of the girl. Do you really want her dragged through hearings and disputes, the press sniffing around? Let her have a quiet life elsewhere." "She already has one," Etta snapped. "You just didn't expect to find good folks standing between her and your money." Silas's patience thinned. "You done talking?" Harmon adjusted his gloves. "For now. But if you change your mind, I'll be staying at the Arroyo Inn. Just until this matter resolves. One way or another." He mounted his horse, tipped his hat in mock civility, and rode off. Inside, Lena sat staring at the map. "He's the one," she whispered. "What do you mean?" baby Etta asked, kneeling beside her. "I saw him once. When Mama got sick, he came to the house. She told him to leave. She was afraid." Maribel's face tightened. "That means he's been circling a long time." Silas exhaled hard. "We need protection, legal and otherwise. I've already wired Judge Henley," Maribel said. "And I have a friend coming in from Tucson. Federal lawyer. Name's Myra Koenig. If anyone can force a stall, she can." "What about the land survey?" Etta asked. "Does it still hold?" Maribel pointed at a crease in the map. "It depends. If Harmon can argue it was never filed federally, he could try to file it now under a claim of default. Would that work? Only if nobody fights it. Which we're doing." That night, Silas loaded his rifle and placed it by the door. Etta sat with Lena on the porch swing, humming a lullaby into the stars. For a moment, peace settled warm as a quilt. Then hoofbeats sounded again, not fast, not threatening, but enough to draw them up to their feet. A young woman dismounted, brushing off trail dust from her jacket and lifting her hat to reveal intelligent gray eyes. "Myra Koenig," she said. "You must be Romero." Silas nodded. "I came fast as I could. Maribel filled me in. You've stirred a hornet's nest, Mr. Romero. We don't mind a few stings." "Well," Myra said with a faint smile, "let's hope you don't mind a fight. Harmon's filed 2 claims already, one on the child's behalf, one contesting her birthright. He's trying to flood the system, wear you down. He doesn't know us." "He will," Myra replied, "and he won't like it." Inside, Lena sat at the table, drawing a picture again. This time, the figure beside the little girl had changed it, now wore a badge. Etta peered over her shoulder. "That's new." Lena looked up. "I think she needs someone who knows how to protect her." "You're right," Sugar Etta whispered. and she's got more than one now. Silas watched from the doorway, the weight of what lay ahead pressing into his spine. But he stood taller. Because the fight wasn't just about land. It was about keeping something pure safe from the rot that came wearing smiles and silver cufflinks. It was about love and law and the strength to stand when the world pushes to make you kneel. And he wasn't kneeling. Not now. Not ever. I ain't hiding from the storm anymore, Myra. I'm standing in it, and I've got something to fight for now. The courthouse loomed like a mountain carved from sun-bleached stone, its frame aged and weathered from decades of prairie winds and dry justice. Silas stood at the bottom of its broad, dusty steps, the brim of his hat shadowing his eyes, as the flag above flapped half-heartedly in the dry wind. Lena clutched his hand, her small fingers wrapped around his with the kind of quiet strength that surprised him every time. Myra walked a few paces ahead, crisp in her navy riding skirt and boots that had known courtrooms as much as they had dirt roads. "We'll file for emergency guardianship this morning," she said without turning. "Judge Henley's fair, but Harmon's already filed a challenge." "Harmon's always 2 steps ahead," Silas muttered. Myra stopped. "Then we'll take 3. Inside the courtroom was cooler, the thick adobe walls shielding it from the heat outside. A few townsfolk filled the benches, curious, nosy, or just needing a place to sit, where no one asked them to work. Harmon sat near the front, flanked by 2 clean-shaven men in black suits. One whispered something into his ear, and Harmon's eyes flicked toward Lena, then to Silas' lips, curling into a smirk. Etta entered moments later, a firm arm around Maribel, who carried a satchel full of maps, letters, and affidavits. She offered Silas a nod, one that spoke more of grit than comfort. "All rise," the bailiff called, as the judge emerged. Judge Henley was an older man with thinning gray hair and a cane he never used, just carried like a memory. He took his seat slowly, eyes scanning the room with weariness and wisdom. "We are here to address the matter of Lena Cartwright's guardianship," he said. "I've reviewed both claims, submitted the existing filing from Mr. Harmon and the emergency motion from Ms. Koenig. Ms. Koenig, your side may proceed." Myra stepped forward, voice steady and respectful. "Your Honor, the child was abandoned in winter on church steps in the care of no one. She was taken in by Mr. Silas Romero, a resident with no legal claim, but who has provided shelter care, education, and security. Her surviving relatives are either absent, questionable, or in the case of Mr. Harmon's client, Caleb Cartwright, proven to have submitted forged documents." She laid the evidence on the bench, one item at a time. This includes the forged custody papers, correspondence linking Mr. Harmon's office to Caleb's forged claim, and letters recovered from the Cartwright home confirming intentions to sell the child's inheritance. We argue for emergency guardianship pending a full hearing on the inheritance and ownership of the land in question. Harmon rose as soon as she finished. "Your Honor, my client has rights to custody under blood relation. The guardianship Myra requests is based on sentiment, not law. And while I admit the earlier paperwork was flawed, it doesn't change the child's lineage." He turned toward the bench. "Children belong with family, even when that family abandoned her in the cold." Myra shot back. Judge Henley held up a hand. "Enough. This is a hearing, not a boxing ring." Silas sat quietly, eyes never leaving Lena, who looked down at her lap, tracing circles on her dress hem. Henley thumbed through the documents Myra presented, pausing on the map. "The land," he said slowly, "is the root of this storm, isn't it?" Neither attorney spoke. The judge exhaled. This court recognizes the potential conflicts tied to mineral rights and inheritance. "I'll grant temporary guardianship to Mr. Romero pending a formal hearing. Full land ownership will be decided once all claims are verified. Relief swept through Silas, though he didn't show it. Lena turned and pressed her cheek to his arm. Myra squeezed his shoulder. But Harmon wasn't done. "I request a court date immediately," he said. "And to subpoena all related family documents?" "You'll get your date," Henley replied. 3 weeks from now." As the courtroom emptied, Harmon approached with the same oily smile he wore like a badge. "You won this round, Romero, but storms don't die after one clap of thunder." Silas didn't flinch. "I ain't hiding from the storm anymore, Myra. I'm standing in it, and I've got something to fight for now." Maribel met them on the courthouse steps. "We've got more trouble." "What kind?" Myra asked. "Found out Harmon's made a deal with a regional surveyor. They're trying to discredit the old maps, say Eliza's claim was never valid. If they succeed, they'll reclassify the land as unclaimed territory, which lets them resell it under corporate charter." Myra finished grimly. Silas's jaw tightened. "They're gonna try to erase everything." "Not if we move faster," Maribel said. "I've sent word to Thomas Red Elk from the Dene Land Council," Etta asked. Maribel nodded. "If anyone can authenticate Eliza's birthright and tie it to native stewardship, it's him." "We'll need him here before the hearing," Myra said. "I already arranged transport. He'll be here in 5 days." Back at the ranch, Lena rode with Etta out past the eastern ridge. The girl had grown braver sitting tall in the saddle, her eyes drinking in the wide sky and rust-colored bluffs. "I want to remember this place," Lena said softly. "You will," Etta replied. "It's part of you now." That evening, Silas stood alone near the barn, running a hand along the smooth wood grain of the rail fence. Myra approached from behind. "You did good in there," she said. "I still feel like it's all balanced on a blade." "It is. But that's where the strongest stand." Silas didn't answer at first. Then he turned to her. "Why'd you come, really, all this trouble for a case in the desert?" Myra smiled faintly. "Because once a long time ago someone did the same for me. They didn't have to, but they did. And it changed everything." He nodded slowly. The night stretched long stars, spinning slowly over the dark New Mexico sky. Inside the house, Lena slept peacefully, the courtroom behind her, but more storms ahead. And outside, Silas kept watch. Because she wasn't alone anymore, and that made all the difference. You can't erase a name that was carved in stone and soil. Eliza Cartwright lived here, bled here, and her blood runs through that girl. The dawn spread in wide amber streaks across the mesas, stretching shadows long and low over the desert floor. Silas stood by the corral, watching the horizon for the dust trail that meant Thomas Red Elk was close. He hadn't slept much, haunted by the weight of decisions too big for one man to shoulder, and the sharp awareness that the real battle was only just beginning. Inside the house, Lena quietly braided her hair, the end looping over her shoulder like a thin rope of hope. She'd started whispering to herself lately, not nonsense or baby talk, but the beginnings of real speech. Words she'd heard Etta say. Words Silas mumbled when fixing the gate or boiling coffee. Words she hoped might make her real enough to stay. At breakfast, the porch creaked under the boots of visitors. Etta opened the door to reveal a tall, sinewy man in his 60s, with weather-worn skin, silver-streaked braids, and eyes that had seen too much. Thomas Red Elk carried a leather satchel and the quiet presence of someone used to walking among ghosts. Thomas, Etta greeted her voice, half relieved, half worried. "Thank you for coming." Thomas nodded. "If the land speaks, I'll hear it." He took a seat at the kitchen table as Lena peeked out from behind Silas's leg. Thomas turned and crouched slightly. "You must be Eliza's granddaughter?" Lena blinked. He offered a small carved bird. From my land to yours. She reached for it slowly, then smiled. A real one. Silas watched them, emotion catching in his throat. She hasn't said a full sentence yet, he murmured. Thomas looked up. She doesn't need to. Her spirit already speaks volumes. After coffee, they set out toward the disputed acreage dry land, veined with scrub, bordered by rock formations Eliza used to walk when she was a girl. Tomas stood at the edge of a weathered sandstone ridge, then knelt beside a jagged stone. She marked this place, he said. Here. He pulled out a folded piece of aged paper, Eliza's journal entry. Then he pointed to the faded carving, nearly lost in wind erosion, her initials, and a date alongside the spiral sun symbol, sacred to the Diné. She was of the land, Thomas said. She wasn't some heiress in a tower. She lived here, claimed this with her hands and her breath. Myra and Maribel arrived midday, trailing in with a new concern. Harmon filed a petition to challenge Eliza's birthright. Myra said, sliding a copy of the document across Silas's table. They're claiming she was illegitimate, that her claim to the land was forged by her mother to bypass tribal allocation laws. Silas cursed under his breath. They're digging up bones now. They're not just trying to discredit, Eliza Maribel added. They want to delegitimize Lena, make it so she has no right to the land or the name. Thomas rose slowly. They can try, but you can't erase a name that was carved in stone and soil. Eliza Cartwright lived here, bled here, and her blood runs through that girl. Myra was already moving. We need to collect affidavits. Anyone still living who knew Eliza personally. Family friends, church records, tribal records, anything. Maribel nodded. We'll need to cross-reference it with the church's birth registries. I know someone in Santa Rosa. I'll ride out there, Silas said. Noetta cut in. I will. You stay with Lena. She needs you now. He hesitated but nodded. That night, Lena sat beside Thomas by the fire pit. He told her stories of wind spirits of the sacred mountains and the way her grandmother used to laugh when she was young. He showed her how to hold a ceremonial stone and whispered, "This remembers your name even if the papers don't." She didn't speak, but she leaned her head against his shoulder. In town the next day, Myra, Maribel, and Thomas met with the tribal council. The head matriarch, Ada Manygoats, listened carefully as Thomas presented the old maps, the journal, and the markings on the ridge. She was quiet for a long time before she finally said, "We will stand as witnesses." Meanwhile, Harmon was not idle. He sent a surveyor to the ridge to reclassify the boundaries, and a man in a gray suit visited the local records office asking to amend Lena's registry to reflect unknown parentage. A clerk named Simon, barely 22, stalled the request and secretly telegraphed Myra. "Desperate men don't break the law quietly," she said, reading the wire. "They do it loud and fast." Silas met her on the church steps that night, the same steps where he had found Lena. "She's finally sleeping easy," he said. "Hasn't done that since we brought her in." Myra looked down the steps, eyes narrowing. "They'll come harder now. We're close. They can come." Silas clenched his fists. "They're not taking her." Just before dawn, a rock shattered their window. Silas jumped from bed, shotgun in hand. Outside, boot prints led toward the road. On the porch, a note pinned with a knife read, "She ain't yours. Stop pretending." Maribel read it aloud with quiet fury. "They want us scared." Silas wasn't. Not anymore. "She's mine in every way that counts. They can burn the papers, but they can't burn love." Later that day, Thomas asked Lena to place her palm on the carving at the ridge. She did silently and closed her eyes. The wind picked up. Thomas turned toward Silas. "She remembers, even if she doesn't say it yet." And back at the ranch, a new letter arrived. From a lawyer in Santa Rosa, a will had been located. Eliza's, signed, witnessed, and sealed, leaving everything to my granddaughter Lena. Silas stood still as stone, holding that letter like it weighed more than the sky. The storm wasn't over, but now they had lightning on their side. When the wind howled through the canyon, it didn't just carry dust, it carried truth that refused to stay buried. The morning sun barely cleared the horizon when Silas rode out toward the courthouse. Eliza's will folded neatly in his pocket, the paper worn soft from being handled too many times in the span of hours. The signature, elegant and firm, was the key to everything. And still, Silas felt the tremble of a brewing storm, one not of weather, but of consequence. Etta stood on the porch, holding Lena, her arms wrapped protectively around the girl who had grown stronger in the quietest ways. Lena's cheeks were flushed from a warm breakfast, her curls wine-tousled. But her eyes, those gray-blue windows into her soul, stayed pinned to Silas as he mounted his horse. "She's not letting go of the doll," Etta said softly. "She clutched it all night." "She knows something's coming," Silas murmured, tipping his hat. "And so do I." In town, the courthouse steps were crowded with townsfolk, some curious, others tight-lipped, nodding to Silas as he dismounted. Myra and Maribel were already waiting along with Thomas Red Elk, whose very presence turned heads and whispered conversations into quiet reverence. Inside the courtroom was modest plank floors, wooden benches, the air thick with dust and nerves. Judge Holloway presided, an older man with a sharp mind and a reputation for fairness, though few envied him the storm about to land in his courtroom. At the front sat Harmon Calhoun, flanked by his legal counsel, a slick man from Santa Fe who looked as out of place in Rosillo County as a rattler in church. Harmon's eyes slid over Silas with the cold detachment of a man who believed paper could erase blood. Judge Holloway called the hearing to order. Myra Cartwright, representing the estate of Eliza Cartwright, has submitted a will for probate naming the child Lena Cartwright as sole heir to the property in dispute. "Objection," Harmon's lawyer snapped. "That will's validity is in question. The mother's legitimacy was never established under federal tribal law, and we believe the will to be fabricated posthumously." Silas stood slowly. "With all due respect, Your Honor, the will is signed, witnessed, and notarized, and I've brought one of those witnesses today." A small gasp rippled through the courtroom as Etta rose from the back bench and walked forward. "I was there when Eliza signed that paper," she said clearly. "She asked me to witness it, and I did, because she knew the land needed to stay in Lena's hands." Judge Holloway nodded. "Let it be entered into the record." Tomas stepped up next. "Eliza was of Diné and Anglo descent. Her lineage is documented. The symbols she carved, the land she touched, the history she bled into this soil, it all stands as witness." The courtroom quieted. Then Harmon's lawyer smirked. "Even if the will is genuine, Your Honor, we intend to argue that Miss Cartwright Eliza was not of sound mind at the time of signing. Her isolation, her estrangement from her family, that isolation was caused by you." Myra interrupted, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "She was pushed out, erased, and still she built a life from the dry bones of this land." The judge raised a hand. "I'll hear all claims, but be warned, counsel, disparaging a woman's mental health without cause will not win you this bench." Outside the courthouse, whispers turned to murmurs, and then murmurs to opinions. Folks who'd once kept their heads down began to speak up. Miss Eloise from the post office brought forward an old photograph of Eliza and her mother with Lena as a baby. Pastor Carl unearthed a baptism record listing Lena as daughter of Eliza Cartwright. Piece by piece, the truth threaded itself together, not as a sudden revelation, but as a stubborn, undeniable reality. Still, Harmon was not done. That night, Silas returned to the ranch to find the barn door open, the latch splintered. Inside, feed bags were slashed open, tools missing. Lena's small garden, the one she'd planted with Etta just weeks earlier, had been trampled flat. The doll was gone. Silas stood in the moonlight, fists clenched. "She's not safe here," he said, voice hoarse. "Not until this is over." "She's safest in your arms," Etta replied quietly. "But we do need help." The next day, Tomas arranged for Lena to stay temporarily with a trusted Diné family outside the reservation. A family who knew what it meant to shelter kin when the world turned cruel. Lena didn't cry when she left, just handed her broken doll to Silas and whispered the word, "fix." It was the third word she'd ever spoken. Silas swallowed hard and nodded. "I will." Back in court, the final hearing began. More witnesses spoke. Mrs. Ortega, who remembered Eliza bringing Lena to town for groceries. Sheriff Kinney, who recalled breaking up a drunken brawl outside a bar where Harmon had called Eliza a mistake born of desert dirt. The weight of the testimony built like a rising wave. Finally, Judge Holloway leaned forward. "I have reviewed the will. I have considered the testimonies, the documented history, the claims of blood and birthright. And I find that the land known as Parcel 19 belongs by right and by legacy to Lena Cartwright." The courtroom fell still. Even the dust seemed to stop spinning in the beams of light. Silas exhaled slowly, the release of weeks of tension, years of unspoken grief. Myra's shoulders trembled. Maribel let out a low, warbling sob. Harmon stormed out, his boots loud against the wooden floor, his plans turned to ash. Outside, the townsfolk stood waiting. Word spread fast in Rosillo, and when Silas looked down the street, he saw a pickup truck rumbling toward them. Inside sat Lena, eyes wide, clinging to the woman beside her. As the truck stopped and the door swung open, Lena scrambled out and ran. "Fix," she whispered again, arms stretched out. Silas dropped to one knee and caught her, clutching her tightly. "I fixed it, little bird," he whispered back. "We did it." And in his pocket, the doll waited, stitched and whole again. A symbol of something broken made right. But even as they stood together in the sun, Silas knew the fight wasn't truly over. Because land and blood may be claimed, but belonging that had to be lived every single day. Sometimes to heal the land, you had to first heal the soul standing on it. The sun rose heavy with gold and silence the morning after the courthouse victory, but the celebration was short-lived. Even as Lena clutched her restored doll and sat tucked in Etta's lap on the porch, Silas could feel the weight of what came next, pressing against his ribs like a stone he couldn't shift. Thomas stood at the edge of the porch, staring out over the field where sagebrush twisted in the breeze. His profile was tight, carved in contemplation. "They'll try again," he said without turning. "Not through the courts, but through pressure, deceit, fear." Silas nodded. They already started. The broken barn door, the slashed garden, the glint of Harmon's eyes as he left the courthouse. It wasn't over. Not when pride, land, and power still rested on a man like Harmon Calhoun having the final word. Myra arrived before noon in her dusty sedan, slamming the door behind her with more anger than was usual. She stormed up the steps and dropped a letter into Silas's hands. "Read it." He unfolded it slowly. A formal notice, local tax assessor's office. A sudden reevaluation of the land's value. An outstanding claim of back taxes. A demand for thousands due within 60 days. They're weaponizing the system, Myra said through gritted teeth. Trying to drown us in red tape. Silas rubbed his forehead, the ink smearing slightly on his fingers. "Can we fight it?" "We can," Myra replied, "but not without exposing every crack in the process. That means Lena gets dragged through more paperwork, more scrutiny, and Harmon's allies will keep digging. Etta stepped out, then holding Lena's hand. So we don't give them more to dig, we give them a wall of stone. Thomas finally turned. Or better roots, the kind that twist deep and never let go. That evening they sat around the dining table, the oil lamp flickering between them. Lena dozed against Etta's shoulder, her chest rising in slow, even breaths. Silas watched her with a heart too full for words. I know someone, Thomas said quietly. An elder. Naomi Benali. Lives out past Sile. She knew Eliza's mother. Might have something, documents, stories, even a tribal ledger. If we can link Lena's ancestry in both worlds, it strengthens the case. Not in court, in community, in identity. Silas didn't hesitate. We'll ride at first light. Thomas gave a sharp nod. But this ride won't be easy. It's a long road, and not everyone on it wants this history unearthed. The next morning, with Lena and Etta safe under Myra's watchful eye, Silas saddled up Tomas beside him. The ride east was long and dry, skirting the rim of the canyon, dipping into gullies where the sun barely touched. Coyotes watched from a distance, and the wind carried more than sand. It carried voices, whispers of memory stitched into the earth. As they neared Silo, the horizon broke into red cliffs and juniper shadows. Tomas led the way to a homestead nestled in a crook of stone where a woman sat weaving beneath a cedar archway. Naomi Benali looked up with eyes that knew storms before they came. You're late, she said, not unkindly, but not too late. Silas dismounted and tipped his hat. We're here for truth. Naomi nodded slowly. Then sit and listen. Inside, her home walls were lined with photos, sepia-toned portraits, medicine wheels, faded documents tucked in glass frames. Tomas explained quietly, reverently, the story of Eliza, of Lena, of the will of Harmon. Naomi listened without interruption. Then she stood, walked to a carved chest, and opened it. From it she drew a ledger. Thin, fragile pages inked in both English and Dene Bizad. Eliza's mother, Sahani, was one of our strongest, Naomi said. She married out, but she never left. She came back to birth Eliza here, registered her herself. She pointed to a faded name on the page, Eliza Cartwright, daughter of Sahani Yazi, 1872. She hid this, Naomi whispered, because she knew there would be a time when blood alone would not protect her child, and her child's child. Thomas exhaled sharply. Silas blinked, stunned. Would the tribal council still recognize this? Naomi placed the book gently in a canvas wrap. They will, because I will bring it to them. They left Sile before dusk. The sky turned molten behind them, casting the land in hues of old fire. Silas rode silently, the wrapped ledger in his satchel, the weight of it sacred. Not just proof, but a root system ready to anchor Lena forever. Back in Rosillo, trouble was already waiting. Myra met them at the edge of the ranch. Her face was pale, her voice taut. Harmon came by, with Sheriff Dugan. Said there's a suspicion of fraud tied to Eliza's records. Sheriff didn't arrest anyone, but he made threats. Silas dismounted in one motion. Where's Lena with Maribel? Myra answered. She's safe. But Harmon made it clear he's not giving up. Inside the house, Etta stood by the window, shotgun leaned discreetly against the wall. Lena played quietly at the hearth doll in hand, her brow furrowed in concentration as she tried to thread a ribbon through the yarn hair. She's talking more, Etta said, nodding toward the girl, whispering to the doll, asking questions. She's got questions worth answering now, Silas said. And we've got the answers. He pulled the ledger from his bag and set it gently on the table. Everyone gathered around it, reverent. We'll get this to the council, Thomas said, and the state if we need to. But more than that, we'll hold our ground. This land belongs to her. A knock came at the door. Silas' tensed hand on the table. It was Maribel, cheeks flushed from the ride. I heard from Eloise, she said breathlessly. Harmon's filed to have Lena placed in protective custody, says the child's living in unstable conditions under an unverified guardian. He's trying to take her away, Silas. Tomorrow. Etta's breath caught. Myra swore under hers. Thomas stepped forward, fists clenched. Silas turned toward the hearth where Lena now looked up at him, the flicker of the fire reflecting in her gray-blue eyes. She's not going anywhere, he said softly. Not while I draw breath. The wind outside picked up, rattling the window panes. Inside, the ledger glowed beneath the lamplight, its truth ready to be told. Truth doesn't whisper, it roars when the time is right. The morning air was thick with tension. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath as a gray-blue dawn settled over the ranch. Silas stood at the kitchen table, calloused hands braced on either side of the open ledger. Beside it sat copies Eloise had helped get them notarized at first light. The original stayed wrapped in cloth, tucked safe beneath the floorboards. Maribel paced by the window boots, tapping like a nervous metronome. Harmon's motions been expedited. Judge Richards is holding the hearing at the courthouse at noon. Myra looked up from a stack of paperwork. And of course they timed it just late enough that we can't get tribal verification delivered beforehand. Clever devils. Etta reached for the small satchel she'd packed for Lena just in case. He thinks he's catching us off guard. He doesn't know what's waiting. Lena came into the room, still in her flannel nightgown, dragging her doll, but her eyes were sharp, now aware. She looked at each face, sensing the undercurrent. Her hand found Silas's, and he squeezed gently. I'm going with you, she whispered. Silas knelt in front of her, his voice low. You are little Star. You're not a secret anymore. You're family. Thomas waited by the truck engine idling. He wore his good coat, the one stitched with the DNA pattern down the sleeves. The truck bed was packed not with gear, but people, neighbors, tribal elders, and even old Mr. Hawkins, the grizzled woodworker, who hadn't left his shop in years. Word got around, Thomas murmured. Seems folks are done letting Harmon run this town. The courthouse steps swelled with bodies by the time Silas parked. Half the town had turned out, some in support, others just drawn by the storm. Inside, the courtroom was colder than the wind outside. Harmon sat smugly at the petitioner's table, flanked by his lawyer, Reese Tully, a slick man with teeth too white for Rosillo. Sheriff Dugan loomed at the back like a dark cloud. Judge Richards, gray-haired and guarded, took his seat with a sigh. This hearing is to determine the guardianship and welfare of one Lena Cartwright minor. We'll hear first from the petitioner. Reese rose smoothly. Your Honor, the child has been living under an unproven claim of guardianship by Mr. Silas Boone, a man with no legal ties to her. The deceased mother's will has questionable authenticity, and until such matters are resolved, we request immediate state custody to ensure the child's safety. Silas didn't flinch. Myra stood. Your Honor, we present documented proof of Eliza Cartwright's birth within the Navajo Nation, her lineage recorded and preserved, and we have notarized copies of those records. Lena is the rightful heir to her mother's land and heritage, and Silas Boone was entrusted with her care in writing. Judge Richards glanced at the documents, eyes narrowing. This ledger, has it been authenticated? Myra stepped forward. The tribal council has begun the process, but due to the short notice, we were unable to bring them in person. However, Naomi Benally, a tribal elder and historian, is here to speak on the matter. Naomi stood her frame straight, despite her age, her voice strong and unwavering. I held that ledger in my care for over 40 years. It is genuine. Eliza's mother recorded her own daughter's birth in it, as was our way. If this court needs proof of Eliza's heritage, that book is it. Reese scoffed. We need more than oral history. Naomi's eyes didn't blink. That's the problem, son. You think truth only lives in typed ink. But truth has a rhythm, a bloodline, and it walks into this room with that little girl. The courtroom hushed. Harmon shifted in his seat. They're building on sentiment, not law. Then Lena stood. She walked to the front, her doll in hand, and faced the judge. My mama told me stories, she said quietly. She said this land was hers, 'cause her mama walked it before her. She said Mr. Silas would take care of me, and he has. He reads to me. He tucks me in. He listens when I don't speak. That's more than Mr. Harmon ever did. Silas's throat tightened. The judge looked long at Lena, then at the sea of faces behind her. Farmers, shopkeepers, elders, a town silently saying, we see this child, and she belongs. I will take these documents under advisement, Judge Richards finally said. But until official review is complete, Lena will remain in the care of Mr. Boone. Furthermore, I am issuing an injunction against any further land claims or removals until tribal authentication is complete. Harmon shot up. This is a farce. The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. Sit down, Mr. Calhoun, or I'll hold you in contempt. Outside, the crowd erupted. Folks cheered, some cried. Naomi touched Lena's cheek. Your mama walks proud today. Silas scooped Lena up into his arms, heart thudding like hooves across open earth. You were brave in there. She tucked her head against his chest. You were brave first. As they loaded into the truck, Thomas pulled Silas aside. There's one more piece, he said, pulling out a folded letter. The council's vote came through. They're recognizing Eliza's lineage officially. Lena is recorded. It's done. Silas felt something in his chest crack open, release like spring breaking through frost. Later that night, back at the ranch, Etta lit a fire in the hearth and placed the ledger on the mantel, a shrine to battles fought not with bullets, but with truth. Myra brought out cider. Maribel played harmonica softly. Thomas carved wood, working on a new doll cradle for Lena. She curled up next to Silas on the rug, staring at the flames. I'm not scared anymore, she said. Silas looked down, brushing her hair from her eyes. That's 'cause you've got roots now, and roots don't scare easy. A sudden knock interrupted them. Etta stood first, cautious. She opened the door slowly. On the porch stood a young man, hat in hand. His face bore the features of someone not yet shaped by time, but his eyes carried weight. I think we're kin, he said softly. Eliza was my half-sister. I didn't know about Lena till last week. Silas rose, heart tightening. I brought something that belonged to Eliza, and I think Lena should have it. Lena stepped beside him, hand slipping into Silas's. The fire inside glowed steady. The door stayed open, and history, still breathing, stepped forward. The educational lesson learned from this story is that family is not only formed by blood, but by the quiet daily choice to protect, nurture, and stand firm when it would be easier to walk away. It reminds us that doing what is right often requires patience, courage, and a willingness to face discomfort rather than surrender to convenience or fear. The story also teaches that truth and integrity may take time to surface, but when supported by community and perseverance, they can withstand even powerful opposition. Above all, it gently affirms that it is never too late in life to become a refuge for someone else, and in doing so, find renewed purpose for ourselves.